a devoted fan, and a plugged-in reporter. There is no better way to talk about hoops than that. Mia O'Brien and Mitch Northam have you covered for the W, the NCAA, Unrivaled, and anything else that involves a ball and a backboard. This is the Women's Basketball Podcast.
What is going on, party people, and welcome into this week's edition of the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things college hoops, WNBA, oh so much more. Mia O'Brien, USA Today's Mitchell Northam, and Mitch, I'm not going to lie, not just because the football team that I cover in the Jacksonville Jaguars eliminated from postseason contention, not just because the NFL team that producer Dimitri covers in the Carolina Panthers eliminated from postseason contention. We're recording this on Monday night. I'm not going to jinx your Steelers. I will simply say it is January 12th as we record tonight, and it feels like college hoop season is truly in full swing. And maybe it's because conference play has been so electric, from chaos in the Big 12, chaos in the SEC, not to mention plenty of sound bites. We're going to dive into all that and more. First things first, though, before we dive into this week's starting five, let the folks know your work at USA Today. I already said it to you off air, but I'm going to say it on air too. No one is having a bigger ferocious, meteoric start to 2026 compared to Mitch Northam, the scoops, the stories he's breaking at USA Today in just his second week on the job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was actually, before we recorded, I went to the grocery store and I was in Wegmans and picked up a USA Today, and there's my name in print. My story about Maggie Doogan scoring 48 points for Richmond, which we'll get into. But yeah, it's been fun. I'm going to publish like a sort of insider's notebook every week. The first one of those is actually out today, and there's a couple little scoops in there that we can get into later if you want. Yeah. And I was just reading what Dimitri is saying in the chat. Okay, we will not do that. But yes,
spoiler alert, folks. We've got some beef on this show. I know you're shocked to hear that there is some beef.
You were saying it feels like, you know, in the middle of college basketball season. For me, it feels that way because we have lots of coaches complaining about things. And
yes.
There was a lot of that in the past 2 days, and I have enjoyed that.
That is not this week's beef of the week because it's number one in this week's starting five. I felt like it was the most logical place to begin the program. That being a final score, LSU 70, Texas 65. Kim Mulkey and the gang get it done. Their first win over an AP top two team since the Barack Obama administration, the first term. And yes, it's a credit to Kim, but also it's a Kim Mulkey team that a week ago some were writing off. And for Vic Schaefer to also be out there and talking about SEC scheduling is out to get us. They have a vendetta against the Longhorns. We're not even talking about what was actually a really good game, Mitch, which is pretty much par for the course when it comes to college sports in 2026.
Yeah. Really, I think, someone wrote, I want to say it was Corey Diaz, who covers LSU. I think he said after LSU beat Georgia, despite all the transfers and the changing of the faces and all that stuff, this LSU team is still at its best when it's led by Michaela Williams and Flau'jae Johnson. And against Georgia, it was Flau'jae who had a great game. And in this game, it was Michaela Williams who has 20 points and 7 rebounds and 4 assists and 5 steals, by the way, and plays 38 minutes in this win over Texas. I thought that, it was a rough game for Rory Harmon. It was kind of a rough game for Jordan Lee. Madison Booker was good. Kyla Oldacre was solid, but it was really a game where Madison Booker kind of had to will them to a victory, and she just couldn't quite get it over the hump there at the end. But yeah, it was a fun finish. I do just want to say about there was 2 funny press conference moments, I thought.
And they were going on. Did they go on back to back or simultaneously? How were they doing it?
I think they went back to back.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they went in the same room. So the first is from Kim Mulkey, where, we know that stat about how LSU had previously not been a AP, I think top 5 or top 10.
Yeah. Top 5. Yeah.
Yeah, ranked SEC opponent since she had been at LSU, because it was shared by Reed Darcy, who covers LSU and does a really good job. And Kim Mulkey kind of went at Reed a little bit and, relayed that and said, you know what I did at Baylor? I beat top teams all the time. I beat Texas all the time. I just want to say,
look at my record, me versus Vic Schaefer.
For the folks that don't know, Kim Mulkey sometimes likes to pretend that she doesn't listen to the outside media. But I can tell you for a fact, every word that is written about Kim Mulkey and is published in like a newspaper, like by the LSU beat writers, she reads every single word written about her. So that was funny. I got a kick out of that. I'm sure that Reed didn't take it too personally. He's a good guy and a good reporter. And then we can get into the Vic Schaefer of it all. Vic Schaefer is a guy who likes to complain. He has complained about playing the SEC tournament, an hour away from South Carolina's campus. He has complained about, he's one of several coaches who has complained about the double regional format of the Sweet 16 Elite Eight and how that impacts your shoot around time and traveling and stuff like that. He is just a guy who likes to complain. And his latest vendetta is that he claims that the SEC has a vendetta against Texas because poor little old Texas has to play LSU and South Carolina in back-to-back games. And Texas had to play South Carolina twice last year, and now they have to play LSU twice. And isn't that a bummer? Here's the thing. The SEC schedules this way because they know that Texas is really good, and they know that LSU is really good, and they know that South Carolina is really good, and this is ultimately a business, and they know that those games are going to draw ratings. And so that's why Texas is playing the two other best teams in the SEC twice in back-to-back seasons. By the way, Tennessee had to play at LSU and at South Carolina in back-to-back games last year. So this is not a just Texas thing. Also, Texas, Vic Schaefer, I believe you knew that Texas was joining the SEC when you took this job. This is a little bit of Vic Schaefer reaping what his university has sowed by joining the SEC. Texas, you did not have to join the SEC. You chose to join the SEC. This is what you signed up for. You're in a league with big boys. And this is the reality. You're a contender. You're going to be paired in these games. Sorry.
First L of the season for the Longhorns. And yes, P.S., they play South Carolina later this week. Let's get to number 2 in this week's starting 5. We head to the Big 12 conference where, oh no, Mitch, one of our favorite storylines, yikes, has it turned quickly in Ames, Iowa. 3 straight L's for Bill Fenley's squad, including the 2 most recent over the last week that resulted in the Cyclones dropping 8 spots in this week's AP Top 25. First, they lose 71-63 at Cincinnati. That's the Bearcats' first ranked win since 2011. I believe that was the year. Definitely, I graduated high school. The year you started college. Correct me if I'm wrong. You already were in college.
Would have been my second year, but yes.
Okay,
close.
So the year I graduated high school, that was the last time that Cincinnati defeated a ranked team. It was Marquette, by the way, the old Big East. Shout out forever. Then the Cyclones lose 83-70 back at Hilton Coliseum to the Greenbrier 5. I mean, the West Virginia Mountaineers in a game in which they committed 25 turnovers. And so you may be asking, why exactly, as Audie Crooks and friends struggling of late? That's because she doesn't have a lot of her friends with her. Her Robin, to her Batman, Addie Brown, her classmates, is out indefinitely with what Iowa State is describing as a lower body injury. Bill Fenley telling reporters earlier this week that this is not a short-term situation. I want to make sure we got the right wording there from the head coach of the Cyclones, one of the longest tenured coach in college hoops outside of Gino Auriemma. So shout out to Bill. Ariana Jackson either, who has had a knee injury, was also a part of the initial starting 5 for the Cyclones. And so Jada Williams, the transfer from Arizona, in turn, is now being asked to do more while also being the primary ball handler and facilitator. And that's why you see a stat line like 9 turnovers to 9 assists with just 7 points scored for Williams, the junior, against West Virginia earlier this week. It's because she's being asked to do everything alongside Crooks, who now teams are starting to pack the paint in an effort to try to stop her and slow her down, and a bunch of young underclassmen out there for the Cyclones. And in a wide open Big 12, I have faith that Fenley and friends are going to figure this thing out. But the whole Addie Brown, this is not a short-term situation. She has to meet with our medical staff. That does not sit well with me.
Yeah, I didn't get the chance to watch this game, but I look at the box score, and the one big thing that stands out to me is West Virginia took 19 more shots than Iowa State did, 65-46. So those turnovers and then 11 offensive rebounds by West Virginia really lopsided the possession, margin here. And West Virginia was able to make the most of those. Because I look at the box score further and I'm like, why is Audie Crooks? She shot 8 of 9 from the floor. Great. Why is she only taking 9 shots? It's because she didn't have the possessions necessary to take more shots. So yeah, Iowa State is going to have to figure out how to get back on track, how to win without Addie Brown, and how to maximize this really, really talented offensive player you have in Audie Crooks, and not waste away what looked at first to be like a really promising season and a potential player of the year campaign for Audie Crooks. If this thing continues to go off the rails, I don't think that's going to happen for either of them.
And now she has competition in the National Player of the Year race. And Mitch, you got to see that player with your very own eyes earlier last week.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go to.
I thought you were going to the game.
No, I didn't. But I am going to go when Richmond visits Davidson later this year. Okay. But I have seen Richmond in person this year. I saw them play against Navy. I did see Davidson in person last week.
You've seen them both individually, and you were live tweeting this game. So I just assumed you were at Richmond Davidson last week.
No, I just flipped on ESPN Plus when it got into the fourth quarter. But yeah, Maggie Doogan, 48 points. Really, really awesome performance by her. A triple overtime win for Richmond over Davidson, who's another team in the A-10 that's really, really good this year. I think the A-10 has the chance to be a 3-bid league this year. I think you're talking about Rhode Island, Richmond, and Davidson in that conversation. I think the kind of best case scenario for those teams is for Rhode Island and Richmond to keep winning and keep kind of stacking these really great wins, because metrics wise, like they both have the really good net and the really good lob. And then if Davidson can make a run and win the conference title when we get to March in Henrico, Virginia, that would be a good thing. But yeah, Maggie Doogan, I feel like she's somebody that we don't talk about all that much. We as the national media, I know we've mentioned her before, but this game from her was incredible. 17 of 28 from the floor, 8 of 12 from three-point land. She is the reigning A-10 player of the year. She also had 13 rebounds in this game. It got to that third overtime, and she hit 3 shots in a row, and the game was over. She just caught fire, and Davidson didn't have an answer for her at that point. She is somebody who I think is going to be scouted and potentially drafted by a WNBA team. She has, she's 6'2" and can do forward things, but she can also do guard things.
I think we talked about this last show or 2 shows ago. Maddie Siegrist as a comp.
Yes, I think that's a great comp. So I looked up some of Maggie Doogan's numbers, and so she's averaging 22.8 points, 8.5 rebounds, 5.1 assists per game this season. Doing the 50-40 thing, not quite there on the 90 with the free throws, but she's the only player in the country this year averaging at least 22 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. So she kind of does it out at all. I think also, she's being taken seriously by basketball people kind of at large. Like, she was invited to Team USA trials for the AmeriCup last summer, didn't make the team, but, was good enough to get there in the tryout and stuff. And she's a game changer. Like, she's a big reason why Richmond was able to beat Georgia Tech in the NCAA tournament last season. And she'll be a big reason why if they get there again. She's somebody who could carry you into a Sweet 16, into a second weekend for a mid-major like Richmond.
if you're keeping score at home, your top 4 scorers in the country, Maggie Doogan at 4 at 24.2 points per game. We'll get to mystery player at number 3, Notre Dame's Hannah Hidalgo. Notre Dame got a nice win over the weekend. We'll get to that, I'm sure, at some point in time. 25.1 points per game. And yes, Audie Crooks of Iowa State still leading the way, 28.3 points per game, although she was held underneath that season average, below that season average in each of those 2 losses last week. Who do you think, maybe you know off the top of the dome, Mitch, who player number 3 is in the national scoring leading department?
I'll
give you a hint.
I think it's Michaela Blake's.
It is. She plays for the team that is number 4 in this week's starting 5. She is sophomore sensation Michaela Blake. She is averaging 24.9 points per game, and she leads one of 3 undefeated teams remaining in the country in the Vanderbilt Commodores. I know we're all out on Diego Pavia. We can be back in on Vandy because of Michaela Blake's. I don't think she's going to be cutting any podcast promos or WWE commercials anytime soon. Good kid. Let's stick with Michaela Blake's. Let's stick with the Doors for a hot second here. They're 17-0. They are undefeated in SEC play. And here's the thing. Of their SEC wins up to this point, and I would argue their strongest non-con victory, Mitch, it's aged really well, and that would be over BYU. Mm-hmm. They've defeated Arkansas, Mizzou, and A&M. Not exactly a murderer's row. We know the highlight this year so far has been that 65-61 win over LSU. When you look inside the numbers, it is fascinating because Vanderbilt, yes, the turnover department, I think, is where they shine the most in the SEC because they're number 2 in taking care of the basketball in turnovers that they actually commit. Then they're number 3 in forcing turnovers, but then they're number 5 in offense in the SEC. They're number 8 in defense. They're 14th in rebounding. And so it's not like they're doing any one thing so spectacularly that has translated to a 17-0 record. It's just well-rounded, good basketball being played in Nashville right now.
Yeah, I think they're just really solid on both ends of the floor. Like I just pulled up her hoop stats page, and they're 11th nationally in points allowed per play, 0.66. That's pretty good. And they're 11th on the other end offensively an effective field goal percentage with a 55.1% clip. So, getting it done on both ends of the floor. They're also 6th in assists per game. So they're sharing the ball well. I do think ultimately this is still a team that will go as far as Michaela Blake takes them, kind of like Iowa State. Like you have a superstar and they are your leader. And without them, I'm not really sure how good you are. But having said that, I do think they do have some good complementary pieces around her. Like we've seen Aubrey Galvin do some good things this year. Justine Passat.
She had a great game over the weekend.
Yeah. Wenentanda, the transfer from Texas. So, they got a good team, and Shea Ralph is a good coach. I do wonder, they're going to have a measuring stick game coming up here. They actually have a non-conference game coming up against Michigan. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day next Monday. So that's going to be a big one for them. Michigan is the team that took UConn to the brink. Neutral site game, that's going to be a big test for the Commodores.
Sensational sophomore versus sensational sophomores, plural, in that one. By the way, don't think Vandy is missing Camille Pierre, which should be duly noted because that was a concern for Vanderbilt heading into 2025-2026, but they have not missed a beat. I mentioned those 4 wins in the Southeastern Conference, one of them coming over a team that I think is going to make an appearance in number 5 in this week's starting 5 and Mitch's weekly coaching carousel update.
Yeah, I wrote a little bit about this in my notebook today at USA Today. You can go check that out. So a couple of things as the wheels are starting to get greased on the coaching carousel. So we knew coming into the season that this was going to be a wrap for Joe McKeon at Northwestern. He announced his retirement last March. Northwestern is moving on this thing. I was told that they are basically advancing into second round interviews this week, doing those via Zoom. Everything's kind of pretty quiet about that.
Can we discuss how Northwestern is in the middle of a season and they're further along in their coaching search than NFL teams, that their sole objective right now is to hire another coach?
Right. Yeah. And they're kind of, if you can think of kind of like the top mid-major coaches that we've talked about over the past 2 years, who might be in the mix to make the jump for the Power Four. Those are kind of some of the names floating around here. Like I've heard Aaron Dickerson Davis. I've heard who's at William & Mary. I've heard, this might be a job Aaron Roussel at Richmond is interested in, but I kind of think he's maybe holding out for something better, even though he is a Midwestern guy.
You also heard some Ivy League coaches potentially, where I think the Northwestern pairing and William & Mary as well. I don't want to be that guy, but let's be real. The Cats are going to be looking for someone who's coming from a university that values academics.
Yeah, the widely seen as like the front runner for this job is Carrie Moore, who took Harvard to the NCAA tournament last season. They won the Ivy League last year. They're solid this season. I don't know that they're an NCAA tournament team. They did just lose to Columbia, I think, over the weekend. But Carrie Moore is somebody who has kind of been seen to maybe move to the Power Four last year, this year. She was in the mix for a couple jobs last season. She's somebody who, has coached at a high academic institution now at Harvard, been the head coach there since 2022, but also has those kind of like Big Ten Midwestern roots. She's from Michigan, played at Western Michigan. She's been an assistant at Creighton in Michigan. Also in the middle there, spent some time under Courtney Banghart at both Princeton and North Carolina. So I think she is somebody who is viewed as the front runner for that job.
And then there's a couple others, including that one that I alluded to that Vanderbilt defeated last week.
Yeah. So we also have kind of some schools who are quietly beginning to sort of put some feelers out and evaluate where the market might be at, and who might be interested in their job should it open, should they decide to make a change. One of those is Texas A&M, that I've heard from multiple sources. They are kind of quietly poking around if they were to move on from Joni Taylor. Joni Taylor is widely liked in coaching circles, but things just haven't worked out at A&M. She is 14-39 currently in SEC play over these 4 seasons in College Station. She's gone to the NCAA tournament just once, and that was a one and out appearance, didn't win a game. So that's one there. I would just say, this isn't me reporting, this is just a feel and a thought. Mm-hmm. If Texas A&M chooses to move on from Joni Taylor, I think the person at the top of their list is going to be Mark Kellogg. From West Virginia. And I think it's worth noting that because I think West Virginia knew last offseason that teams were going to start coming for Mark Kellogg. And so they reworked his contract. They gave him an extension, but they also increased his buyout. And it's now I think it's the most expensive buyout in the Big 12.
Wow.
So Mark Kellogg is somebody who has Texas roots and has all that connection there, came up coaching at Stephen F. Austin and was really successful there, and now has done an awesome job at West Virginia these past 3 seasons that he's been there. We just mentioned that big win over Iowa State. The other program that I've been told is quietly kind of poking around at, maybe replacing their coach is VCU. Beth O'Boyle has been there since 2014, but they've gone to the tournament just once. That was in the COVID impacted 2021 season. And she is on pace for what would be her 3rd losing season in 4 years. I was kind of asking around, and VCU is viewed as like a really good mid-major job. And I think that's because they have not only they have really good facilities there. Like I've been to the arena at VCU, it's a nice place. They're in the A-10, good mid-major league. They're in Richmond, good, market for recruiting and stuff like that. But I also think it's a place, as we talk about with RevShare coming on, they don't have football. And they have demonstrated, they have, I think, one of the best or budgets for men's basketball in the mid-major ranks. I think they've openly publicly talked about we're committing X number of dollars or whatever to the men's basketball program. So they're a school that has openly talked about committing dollars to basketball. And I think that's why that would be an attractive job if it were to open.
Well, especially when your crosstown rival has the fourth leading scorer in the country in a conference that, as we already alluded to, is looking like a 3-bid league.
Yeah.
You got to wonder, if you're VCU, you're in the basketball business, why are you not playing in an NCAA tournament each and every year?
And I think that's maybe why the heat has kind of been turned up on Bethel Boyle a little bit, is like, Richmond's got this thing humming. George Mason's, they made the tournament last year. So it's like, well, where's the disconnect? Why are you doing this? It's, if our neighbors can figure this thing out, we should be able to too. Maybe you're just not the right person.
That is this week's starting 5. Now that we've rounded out this week's starting 5, you know what that means, folks.
Pure beef.
It's time for the beef of the week. But first things first, if you liked that little beef of the week animation, sounder, liner, if you liked our wonderful open, then maybe you should check out auditoryfx.com. Make your podcast sound bigger and more professional. All the audio tools you need to take your show to the next level. The perfect gift for yourself, the podcaster in your life. In case you forgot to get somebody a Christmas gift around the holidays, that's what auditoryfx.com is here for. Packages start as low as $19.99. All right, Mitch. No, we're not going to discuss the ethics of press room decor and press room etiquette like we are in other worlds and other circles of the sports media landscape on this fine January 12th as we record. No, instead we will head to this notion, this world, or rather stratosphere in sports media. I'm trying to come up with other analogies or other words for it. So our friend Talia Goodman of On3 posted a graph that you sent to our group chat with producer Dimitri earlier this week. The most watched women's college basketball teams through January 3rd per the Nielsen ratings. The top 10 ranking through January 3rd showcases the teams with the highest viewership on ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPNU, which of course prompts the question of, well, UConn does not play most of its games on ESPN. They play the bulk of their games on Fox and perhaps one or two here and there with the NBC package that the Big East is now signed on for. And so here is, and she verified this earlier today, the top 10 ranking includes games that are on ABC, Fox, FS1, FS2, which I thought was interesting. So you say this is the updated tweet. The data listed here, it's all accurate, but the networks had yet to be updated following the first release of this data. I don't know what that means. Okay. Top 10 ranking includes games shown on ABC, CW, ESPN2, ESPN, ESPNU, Fox, FS1, FS2, Ion, NBC, True TV, and TNT. So maybe it isn't just the ESPN primary cable networks. Either way, here is the top 10 most watched women's college basketball teams through 2025, or the 2025 portion of the 2025-2026 calendar year. Iowa State at 1, Iowa's at 2, USC, Southern California, not South Kakalaka, is at 3, Notre Dame 4, Louisville 5, Michigan 6, the Huskies of UConn 7, Baylor 8, South Carolina at 9, and the Texas Longhorns at 10. Mitch, the floor is yours because this one certainly, I think it stirred up a lot of beef in a lot of different quadrants of the women's basketball world.
Yeah. My first, when I first saw this list, this is still my reaction now that Talia has kind of, verified it, that this does include all the networks. I think this is just still shows the power of being on ESPN. I think that, I just went and looked at UConn's schedule. They've only played 2 games on ESPN platforms this year. Louisville, their season opener, which I believe was a game played in the middle of the day. And then they played USF on ESPN2 on a Tuesday at 5:00. So they haven't had any of the primetime ESPN slots. Whereas I'm fairly certain that all of Iowa State games have been on ESPN platforms, or damn near close to it. Iowa, you know, they're in the Big Ten. Their games are kind of spread out a little bit between Big Ten Network and Fox and NBC and stuff like that as well. My other takeaway is like, you know, there's a lot of teams that, you know, ACC, SEC, most of their games are on ESPN. Iowa State being number one tells me that there is a draw to Audie Crooks, which is what we've talked about kind of all season. You know, maybe she is not the most all-around, most talented player in the sport. That's probably Sarah Strong. But in terms of like excitement and offensive firepower and like ability, which are all things that contribute to people tuning in and watching, Audie Crooks is right up there. And I think that's why Iowa State is your number one. And up until this 3-game losing streak, they've also been really good. So, you know, it also tells me the state of Iowa loves it, some women's basketball, with Iowa being number 2 there. USC being number 3, like, I get that. You know, they're still a big
They've been
brand.
in a lot of primetime slots, independent of Juju Watkins being out.
Yeah, still have had a lot of really good slots. You know, they've played several national TV games that I think have been on ESPN platforms. You know, that NC State game, their South Carolina game, some of those here and there. Notre Dame be number 4. I think, you know, we were talking about this in our group text. You know, Hannah Hidalgo still kind of being the most exciting player in the sport. I'm also interested, like, I look at this chart and LSU isn't on there.
Yep. I was thinking the same thing, but also we're burying the lead. Look who's number 9.
South Carolina. Yeah.
That for me was my biggest takeaway, and maybe it's just because I lived in the state of Iowa. I know how much they love women's basketball. I also know ESPN was being very strategic when they made the annual Jimmy V Classic on the women's side, the Cy-Hawk rivalry game at Hilton Coliseum between the number 1 and number 2 most viewed team. Like, they knew what they were doing. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do believe it was the most viewed game so far this season in women's basketball. And so I think that inflates the number a little bit, just because that was a great primetime Wednesday night matchup. And those two teams do tend to play a good chunk of their games on ESPN. Although I'm curious with the Big Ten contract, how that has affected Iowa and their ratings, because it's not like they're predominantly only exclusively on ESPN like they were in a previous era. No, the South Carolina and the LSU of it all was what surprised me personally the most.
Yeah, I think LSU not being on here, I mean, you know, one of those things is like, well, LSU ain't played nobody.
They're playing on True TV and not True TV. Sorry, we like you, True TV, especially in the month of March. Bowler TV, ESPN Plus, yeah, because who they play?
They ain't played nobody. So I would venture to say, like, probably one of their few games. I think that game at Duke was like 9 p.m. on ESPN. It's like, you know, that's a game that was on national TV in a good slot. But, you know, until conference play starts, like, you know, if you're kind of a casual women's college basketball fan, just kind of flipping around on channels, like, LSU number 1 is probably not on the channels you're flipping around, because they're on ESPN Plus, because they're playing cupcakes. And number 2, like, if you have the chance to, like, if you're scrolling on ESPN Plus and you see, oh, LSU, who are they playing? And Southeastern Texas, Louisiana State, whatever, like, you're probably not tuning into that game, even though I think Flau'jae Johnson is still, like, perhaps the most recognizable face we have in women's college basketball. You know, just
besides Daisy.
Yeah, well, I just, you know, Flau'jae is the one who, like, you know, she was on that 2023 team that went head to head with Caitlin Clark that everybody watched. So everybody saw Flau'jae as a freshman, right? And then since then, you know, with her career as a hip hop artist and everything else, like, that's gotten her some cred. And then all last March Madness, she was in a Powerade commercial every time they went to commercial break. Right. So, like, she's somebody, like, I think my mom knows who Flau'jae Johnson is. I don't know if she knows who Sarah Strong or AZ Fudd or Audie Crooks are, to be quite honest. But yeah, these ratings, it's definitely some interesting numbers. I don't know why everybody, like, some people took it so personally and, like, had beef with them, but this is the data. So
What I do know, Mitch, is that at some point in time, because as we are around the midway point, if not past it, of the college basketball season, we are going to have to do a little bit of a straw poll in terms of the National Player of the Year race, because you've been saying for weeks now to sprinkle a little bit on Audie Crooks. Now you're on the, what are we going to say? The Doogan train, the Doogan, or rooting for Doogan, or do we have a mantra or a slogan yet? Or
I mean, as far as like a gambling perspective, I still think that Audie Crooks, if Iowa State gets it together, if she keeps scoring the way she is, they're, again, like the power of ESPN, they're going to keep playing on ESPN. Like, she's going to be the one that's front and center a lot of the times. And that's going to matter. That matters a lot. Like, I hear college football reporters, all the time talk about like the Heisman a lot of times comes down to like narrative, and who wins that and stuff. If it was always who is the best player in college football, like we would have seen Ndamukong Suh win a Heisman and that didn't happen. Or we would have seen Keenan Reynolds from Navy win a Heisman and that didn't happen. So sometimes like it's about narrative and it's about how much have people seen you, and it's about, are you like comfortable in front of microphones and open with media and stuff like that? And do you want to be the face of women's college basketball? And, all hoop heads will tell you that Sarah Strong is the best player in the sport, yes, but she has no interest in being the face of women's college basketball.
Yeah. And as I was told by a coach, she is the singular best player in the sport right now, but she is not the most dominant. The most dominant player in the sport is Lauren Betts. The second most dominant player in the sport is Audie Crooks. And this is a nice little primer for at some point down the road, maybe next week's show, when we do take time to look at the mid-season awards, that mid-season National Player of the Year race. And hopefully next week, Mitch, or maybe we do get some sort of resolution, but hopefully no more updates, because we have to make this week's semi-main event CBA negotiations, and the very latest coming out today as we're recording this podcast on Monday, January 12th, that a moratorium on league business has been reached, aka status quo, because the WNBA and WNBPA did not agree on a new CBA by the January 9th date that they had agreed upon for the new deadline. Working conditions of the previous CBA are being maintained. Sources tell Ramona Shelburne of ESPN that the two sides remain far apart in negotiations on the new CBA. What does this mean in the here and now? Well, even if I'm using the word status quo or the term status quo, Mitch, free agency has kind of been halted because you can't extend qualifying offers. You can't core players or designate a core on a player. And you certainly can't court new free agents when you have no idea what number you can offer said player.
Yep. It's going to be pretty hard to do league business when you don't know what the salary structures are going to be. And a lot of the really, really good players in this league are free agents this year.
All but two veterans, as a matter of fact, because everyone knew the CBA was coming up this year. And so they said, all right, I'm going to structure my contract so that when I can cash in on that new money and that new TV money, I'm going to make sure that I do.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a mess. I wrote a story, last week at USA Today, just off of what Brianna Stewart had to say after Unrivaled practice, where she was just like, we're not coming to an agreement tomorrow. So that tells me that the sides were far enough apart where she could say that well in advance. They're not calling for a labor strike yet, but also the Players Association, they're launching these player hubs where players can continue to work out and get training and stuff like that if there is a work stoppage and if they are locked out from team facilities and stuff. So the signs are not good here. And I think, as we've all said, and Dimitri, I think, even wrote this, over at Awful Announcing, like, it would be very, very bad for the WNBA to have a lockout or a work stoppage of anything that impacts the regular season, that impacts the trajectory that women's basketball is currently on. Especially in a year where you are going to have Caitlin Clark back and healthy, and it's going to be year 2 of Paige Beckers, and you have these 2 expansion teams coming into the league. Like, there's just all these storylines, and like for that to be halted or paused or pushed back in any way would be very bad for business.
And it's interesting, and I'm curious what you've heard from some of the agents that you've spoken with, but from what I have heard, and certainly, yes, I'm not going to say who I heard it from, and it was not Donna Orender for the record, with the Upshot League starting an independent operation, the goal, of course, and I can't say it because I know they don't want me to, but that it will eventually be the G League, if you may, but it will operate independently of the WNBA. They, from what I've been told, are getting the sense from agents and from players that there will be an agreement in place, that there will not be games canceled in the WNBA. And so those players who are still waiting to hear whether or not they're going to get a training camp invite are going to go to the WNBA training camp. And then if they don't make a roster, then they would come and play in the Upshot League. And it's great business for us here locally in Jacksonville and the other 3 locales that will begin play this summer. But when I spoke to some folks over there, it sounded like when they have spoken to agents and players, there was optimism of the deal is going to be reached prior to when games are slated to tip off. And that is not until May. And so the question becomes, especially knowing that you also are going to have a stoppage of the WNBA regular season in September prior to the playoffs because of the World Cup, and you've got another USA training camp going on. That's the part that I think that the preseason, that limbo period between when Unrivaled, when Athletes Unlimited wraps at the end of February, beginning of March, and the start of training camp, that is where I think they could push this thing all the way out to. I don't think that's healthy for the league, especially given that I also cover the NFL, and the NFL, no one's going to ever compete with their 365-day per year calendar. Right. But the WNBA, I mean, look, last year when we had the Golden State Valkyries, the expansion draft, that was in late December. And that was a nice little fun Tuesday night viewing experience for women's basketball fans. And I think it went into a game on ESPN. And so, I think people are clamoring for it, especially with those 2 expansion teams and what it's going to mean combined with the player movement we're expecting to see because of a new CBA and what that would mean for how much players on the open market can get paid.
Yeah, I think that the chances of like there actually being like a loss of games, I think the chances of that are still slim. I think that eventually they will come to an agreement. I just want to say personally, I hope that they get this done before March Madness starts, because myself and a lot of other people who cover women's college basketball also cover the WNBA. And I don't really want to have to be worrying about signings in an expansion draft while I'm trying to cover the Sweet 16. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they say no off season for a reason, Mitch, when it comes to covering women's basketball. Shout out to our friends at The Athletic. But also, let's also be real. I think that I say this lovingly. If Nafisa Collier, Brianna Stewart, and Nneka Ogwumike can make themselves the main character, they're going to make themselves the main character. So, sorry. Yes. It's just a fact. Just a fact.
I hope that they get it done over the next month and change.
It would be nice.
It would be great. You talked about kind of using the expansion draft as like a lead into, a primetime college game or something. That would be great to have like at the end of February or like leading into like a conference championship game or something like that. I'm sure ESPN would love to have that inventory. But yeah, you got to do an expansion draft this year that's twice the size of the one that you did last year, where you're going to have 2 different teams picking. And yeah, you need to give front offices time to not only select those players, but to suss out free agency and figure out, okay, if I'm not protecting this player, then we need to sign her replacement and then. And yeah, it's a mess. Yeah.
It's not great, but hopefully we either have a good update for you next week or we have no update, and therefore we can run through our midseason college basketball awards. Just saying, would be nice. Let's keep it moving with this week's Making Money with Mitch. 19-5 on the year, another 2-1 week. Come on, Maryland. You got to treat your native son better than that. Who do you have in this week's 3-pack, Mitch, of picks?
Yeah, Terps let me down. Everybody else, good job.
Terps let a lot of people down this week, by the way.
Yeah. Good week for Ohio State, though. Shout out to Jelani Cambridge. We're going to start this week off on Thursday night. This is 6 p.m. Eastern, ACC Network. Louisville is at Notre Dame. This is, I think, a big measuring stick game for both teams. I wrote about Louisville's resurgence in my notebook that's at USA Today. They're playing really, really well. I think they're the ACC's best chance at grabbing a top 16 seed right now. I also just think they're really good, and I think they're better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame is favored by 6.5 points. I will take Louisville to cover that. If that line stays the same, I would also think about taking Louisville to win straight up. I think Louisville's better.
Who do you think has been more resurgent over the last 4 weeks? The Duke Blue Devils or the Louisville Cardinals?
I think given preseason expectations, we've paid more attention to Duke's comeback. But Louisville, I wrote this in my notebook just about them. They've kind of, since Walls has been there basically, right? They've gone to 4 Final Fours. They've kind of had this standard of, basically like Elite Eight or bust. Like they went to 5 straight Elite Eights. And then these past 2 seasons didn't get out of the first weekend of the tournament. And I think a lot of, Louisville fans and just people around the country, they, were just like, what's going on with Louisville? Like, why have they taken a step back? Last year, Jeff had a really, really young team. I think this year you're seeing that young team get older and get better. And then you add Laura Ziegler into the mix and you have a great team. I think they're a different and a better team than the one that lost to UConn in the season opener, than the one that lost to Kentucky later in November. I mean, this is a team that only lost to South Carolina by 2 points. And since then, they've won 9 in a row. So, I really like Louisville this season. I think there's a good chance that we might see them and Duke meet up for the ACC title.
I like that. Something that 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, maybe we would have written that off, but they ain't right back though. Louisville, 6.5 point underdogs at Notre Dame Thursday, ACC Network, 6 p.m. Number 2 in this week's Making Money with Mitch, sir.
Yeah, this is Sunday at noon on the SEC Network. Ole Miss is at Georgia. Ole Miss is favored by 7.5 points. I'm taking Ole Miss, and I'm going to take Ole Miss because Coach Yo is talking cash, and she's mad about her AP ranking, and so I'm telling her to back it up. If you think that you're as good as you say you are, then go into Georgia and cover the spread and win.
Listen, Coach Yo gets a lot of flack on this podcast, which is insane when you consider prior to her stay in Oxford, Mississippi, she coached in Jacksonville, Florida, and remains a legend here. So you would not think this would be the program where she might get some flack, but instead it is. And of course, Ole Miss is coming off of an impressive win over then number 5 Oklahoma, 74-69. They hung with number 2 Texas the game prior. I don't know. Cody McMahon loves to be the villain, so she can embrace her villain era. And now they are this young upstart that everyone wants to give them bulletin board material, right? That's the way that's supposed to go.
Yeah. I'm going to take Ole Miss there. To round things out, this is not the game that I picked.
You're not going to play a little Maryland.
This is the game I picked.
The Terps let you down last week, and you're going to go back to the well?
Yeah, I'm going against the Terps this week. This is Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern on NBC. So this is a big nationally televised game. The Terps are at UCLA, and the Bruins are favored by 10.5. I'm going to take the Bruins. I like Maryland. I still like Maryland. I think they're a good team. I really like Brenda Freese. I gave her, my midseason Coach of the Year award over at USA Today. But UCLA is just better. And Maryland doesn't have any size. They don't have an answer for Lauren Betts. I think UCLA is going to cook them.
UCLA is at a point where they can let their players play multiple sports and only play in home games, and and they're still dominating.
Shout out to Megan Grant.
Yeah, it's great. What about Hami Haka as a sister? Is she going to play both, or is she going to play softball? Or
I don't know.
She did last year, right?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
She might be like an opposite Megan Grant, whereas like basketball is her main thing. And like, I think when basketball season is over, then they'll give her to the softball team. Whereas like Megan Grant, softball is the main thing. So it's like, all right, rest of the regular season, like you're not traveling.
No, it's honestly, it's such a throwback. It gives even more justification to multi-sport athletes not specializing in one sport, and I'm here for it. So shout out to the former Conference of Champion Westwood Bruins for holding firm in trying to build champions, not just on the basketball court, but in life itself. So Mitch's picks this week, folks. Louisville plus 6.5 at Notre Dame on Thursday. Ole Miss, a 7.5-point favorite at Georgia on Sunday. And then Maryland going against his homeland. Mitch Northam is taking the UCLA Bruins, a 10.5-point favorite Sunday afternoon on NBC. Time for last call. Any of the storylines, the teams that we may have missed in today's episode. I want to hit one that we just referenced briefly when discussing Ole Miss, and that is Jenny Baranchik's Oklahoma Sooners. What in the heck is happening with the folks out in Norman, Mitch? Because this is not the team necessarily. And I know it's 14-2. It's just, not 14-3 now after the loss to Kentucky, after the loss to Ole Miss. And so you can write it off as a bad week for a Sooners team, though, that, let's be real, they have Aaliyah Chavez. They have the number one recruit, or unless you believe Jazzy Davidson was the number one recruit by a different service, but I digress. Point being, you have this electric playmaking point guard. You have a veteran 4 to round out your starting 5 alongside her. What's going on with our friends out in Oklahoma these days?
I think Oklahoma is going through a stretch where they are realizing sometimes when you hand the keys to your offense over to a freshman, she can shoot you out of a game. And the last couple outings for Aaliyah Chavez have not been great from an efficiency standpoint. Now, she did score 26 points against Ole Miss, but she shot 7 of 22 to do that. And she only scored 18 against Kentucky, 7 of 23 from the floor to do that. She also had 7 turnovers against Ole Miss. So, there's Aaliyah Chavez has had some great moments this season. She was awesome in that win over NC State. She's had some really solid performances in games, but sometimes freshmen do freshman things and they shoot you out of games or they turn the ball over. And I think Oklahoma is dealing with that and grappling with that right now. And they just got to figure out a way to maybe kind of rein her in a little bit, but still let her be her and figure out what the best formula is.
Kentucky, one of those two teams to defeat the Sooners last week. And I'm just pleading for the Wildcats. Kenny Brooks, can you just be normal for a second here? Because you get a big win over a top 5 OU squad, who I know now that's back-to-back losses for Baranchik's team. But then that came on the heels of the Cats losing to Alabama. What the heck is going on with UK?
I think that Alabama loss was we are figuring out how to play with Tiani Key. And our offense didn't really bring it that day. They shot just like 31% from the floor or something like that. And then against Oklahoma, we're able to kind of figure some things out a little bit. And Tony Morgan really turned it on, 22 points and 4 assists in that one. Claire Strack did Claire Strack things, I think had a double-double and 3 blocks. So I think Kentucky's just figuring out how to do things without Tiani Key for the time being. It sounds like that Tiani Key is going to come back this season.
Okay. Because it's the elbow.
Yeah, based on what Kenny has said, like they've gotten good news from the doctors and they haven't ruled her out for the year. And so maybe a couple weeks.
So we've got the SEC as dog eat dog as they come. The ACC, as you alluded to, Louisville would be your pick as of this writing to win the regular season. We already mentioned, since they were in Making Money with Mitch, that they will face Notre Dame. Notre Dame's coming off of a pretty nice win in the Triangle. Are they not, Mitch Northam?
Well, it was at home, but yes, it was over.
Oh, sorry. It was in South Bend. My apologies.
But yeah, that was a good win for Notre Dame. They beat North Carolina by 23 points in a game where, like, I just thought that was kind of an embarrassing performance for North Carolina. Like your top 2 scorers, India Navarre and Sierra Toomey, score 4 points on a collective 1 of 12 shooting. That's not great. And like you really just had no inside presence against a Notre Dame team that itself does not really have a post presence. But they couldn't stop Hannah Hidalgo, who had scored 31 points. And Cassandra Prosper had another great game, 17 and 14. And then Vanessa De Jesus comes out and, former
She's been
Duke
sneaky good. I've enjoyed her character arc this year.
Yeah.
Nice little role
North
player.
Carolina, I think it's the thing that, like we talked about before with them and NC State, like I just don't know who the bus driver is for this team. I don't know who they're supposed to turn to when they get in these games like this where the Sierra Toomey thing isn't working down low, when they're not forcing a bunch of turnovers and, getting Indy Navarre and Nyla Harris on the fast break. Like, who is the person that sets them straight? And I don't know who that person is right now.
No triangle teams ranked in the AP Top 25 poll this week. Duke was 27th, second among those receiving votes. That is per USA Today's Mitch Northam. We don't know the last time that no triangle teams were in the top 25.
Yeah, it's probably been a while. I don't know. Last year we had all three triangle teams host during the first weekend in the NCAA tournament. There's a chance that none of them host this year. And believe it or not, I think Duke has the best chance to do so right now because Duke had that really ridiculous, like they've played arguably the toughest schedule in the country so far. So they have a solid net. They have a good WAB, which is wins above bubble. And so if Duke keeps winning and they kind of tear through the ACC, they can play their way into the top 16. I don't really have faith in North Carolina or NC State doing that. I mean, NC State just lost at Clemson. North Carolina, I don't think has beaten a ranked team yet this year. It's not been good for the Triangle.
Shout out to Clemson, though. I really thought you were going to put them in the starting five, but you could shout them out here in last call.
Yeah. I talked to Sean Poppy last Friday after their historic win over NC State. They had not beaten NC State since 2011.
Another 2011 reference, man. Let's turn back the clock. Where's Nicki Minaj when you need her?
Losing streak to NC State for Clemson. But the Fighting Sean Poppy's got it done down there in upstate South Carolina last Thursday. So, yeah, I talked to him about that and kind of how they're sort of an avatar for what we've seen a lot of this season, which is the transfer portal influencing parity across the sport. Like you look at a team like Texas Tech, and, Bailey Maupin has been there for 4 years, but a lot of, I think two of their starters came from the portal and their second best scorer. And, so the portal has really kind of leveled the playing field, I think, in this sport.
But it also should be noted that Poppy is also doing yeoman's work on the high school recruiting trail as well.
Yes. Next year, he has like one of the best recruiting classes in the country coming in.
Right.
But I think he's kind of fast tracked his rebuild by doing it through the portal in these first two seasons.
Somewhere Dabo Sweeney is smiling because, yes, he's using the portal, but he's still hitting that high school recruiting trail. Let's hit a couple more before we get out of here. Columbia, we already mentioned this one, a buzzer beater victory over Harvard. Shout out to Perry Page for the winning buckets. Our Washington future, not looking great after this week, Mitch. Are we just writing it off as a one-off for the Huskies?
I just don't know what to make of Washington. They've been inconsistent. I still think they're a tournament team. I like Sellers. Avery Howell. Is that who I'm thinking of? Avery Howell? She plays? Or is that
so.
Which one went to UConn and which one went to Washington of the USC transfers?
Oh.
Kaylee Heckle went to UConn.
Yes.
Avery Howell went to Washington. Okay.
Yes.
I think that's right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of Washington.
They lost to Purdue, in case you missed it, folks, 78-72 on the heels of a loss to number 15 Michigan State, 82-67, which, of course, came after their euphoric breakthrough win over a top 10 Michigan team. So the Big Ten is also any given night, any given Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, find a way to win. So shout out to all those teams in the Big Ten as well.
I would call that a seat cooling win for Purdue's coach.
And I didn't want to say it because I had a feeling that you might. I'll end my last call shout outs with this, Mitch. I'm sure you have seen it at this point in time. There's a meme floating around the internet right now saying that you need to thank Caitlin Clark for Miami being in the national championship game.
I'm aware of this.
Why is that, you ask, in case you have not seen it? The rabbit hole, the domino effect, it is vast. If Caitlin Clark and Hailey Van Lith had not met in the Elite Eight of the 2024 NCAA tournament, in which Caitlin Clark put Hailey Van Lith on skates at LSU, that, of course, prompted, I think Hailey Van Lith was probably already on her way out of Baton Rouge, but that one certainly prompted her to transfer for a final season of college ball to TCU, which prompted the Cavender twins to transfer back to Miami because they were worried about playing time for Haley Cavender. And thus, Hannah Cavender started dating Carson Beck. Carson Beck, then the quarterback at Georgia, says, I'm going to go hang out in Coral Gables with the Cavender twins and Mario Cristobal. Then his car got stolen. He got outed on TikTok as being maybe not the best boyfriend in the world. And in turn, he became the quarterback of the Miami Hurricanes, who now will play Indiana for the national championship in college football. Thank you, Caitlin Clark, for giving us such a wonderful sports storyline as we begin the 2026 calendar year.
So Michael Irvin needs to send Caitlin Clark a gift.
Honestly, I'm shocked that Michael Irvin hasn't yet, because I'm shocked he didn't start this meme. I feel like that would be very much like something he would make a YouTube video explaining, that this big brain theory of thank you, Caitlin Clark, for giving us college football chaos with a 10 seed, making it all the way to the finals.
If Miami beats Indiana for the title, is that the ultimate, like, is that another Caitlin Clark wrinkle? Yes. Like her getting a laugh against, a Big Ten rival? Okay.
Yes, undoubtedly. And I'm sure she'll relish in it, except for the fact that now she resides an hour away from Bloomington. So I'm sure she's enjoying this run by Fernando Mendoza, Curt Cignetti, and friends. I know I certainly am, Mitch. And especially given the fact that we're seeing, you alluded to it, through the portal, we're seeing schools like Texas Tech in seemingly every sport. We're seeing a school like Indiana who is doing it, much like Sean Poppy, through both traditional recruiting methods, but also identifying at the FCS and low mid-major level and bringing in talent to the gridiron. I think we're seeing non-blue bloods emerge. And I think that's healthy, let alone what I already referenced about Miami being the 10 seed in the college football playoff and making it all the way to the finals. So I don't want to hear come March about Cinderella is dead, because while Miami may not wear the same crown and slipper that a traditional Cinderella would wear in football, they're still the 10 seed, and they made it all the way to the finals. Even if they get to play in their home stadium, it gives me hope for March. We're going to get some upsets, and we're going to get away from this dumb narrative of NIL and the portal killed Cinderella.
Do you think Curt Cignetti knows who the Cavender twins are?
I was just stunned that he said he wanted a beer after the semifinal win. Like, I didn't think that was possible.
That's the yinzer in him.
I think the
cold, icy light.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's a Western Pennsylvania guy through and through. But I would say this, more likely Curt Cignetti knows who the Cavender twins are, or Fernando Mendoza knows who the Cavender twins are. Because, he's not on social media. He's only on LinkedIn and YouTube.
I was told and saw on social media that Fernando Mendoza went to Magic City.
I saw that was like fake, though. No, but I heard it was fake.
Oh, okay. I think
was it real?
I don't know.
You don't ever know what to believe on the internet these days. But you can believe us here on the Women's Basketball Podcast, especially with all the great coverage that Mitch also has cooking at USA Today. What is in the hopper for the week of January 12th, sir?
Yeah, we're gonna I kind of have some things I'm gonna be doing every week there. So I'll do a watch guide every week, and I'll do a bracket watch again, and I actually have a story coming out. It'll already be out by the time you hear this, about the Athletes Unlimited Softball League. So look out for that. And yeah, working on some other fun stuff. I'm going to go to South Carolina and Texas on Thursday.
Nice.
And drive out of Columbia for that one. So yeah, I'll have something from that game as well.
Love it. I will be on the call for JU, their double header between Central Arkansas Thursday and then North Alabama on Saturday, because yes, the Jaguars have sadly been eliminated from the postseason. And so it is truly now basketball season. Also was a part of the ASUN tournament planning meeting last week, Mitch, because of course, every game of both the men's and the women's tournament will be played here in Jacksonville, Florida. And so very excited to be on the call for a couple of those games, help in the planning. First time that Jacksonville, one singular city, has ever hosted the ASUN basketball tournaments. And so until next week, he's Mitch, I'm Mia, saying we will catch you next week.
Deuces.